Fracture. Bone fracture basics. There are several types of bone fractures, and each type can have slight variations. 1. Open fracture. 2. Closed fracture. 3. Partial fracture. 4. Complete fracture. 5. Stable fracture. 6. Displaced fracture. 1. Open fracture. A fracture in which the bone breaks through the skin and can be seen outside the leg. This is also called a compound fracture. 2. Closed fracture. A fracture that does not break the skin. This is also called a simple fracture. 3. Partial fracture. An incomplete break of the bone. 4. Complete fracture. A complete break of the bone causing it to be separated into 2 or more pieces. 5. Stable fracture. The broken ends of the bone lie up and have not moved out of place. 6. Displaced fracture. There is a gap between the broken ends of the bone. Repairing a displaced fracture may require surgery. 10 common types of bone fractures. 1. Transverse fracture. Transverse fractures are breaks that are in a straight line across the bone. This type of fracture may be caused by traumatic events like falls or automobile accidents. 2. Spiral fracture. As the name suggests, this is a kind of fracture that spirals around the bone. Spiral fractures occur in long bones in the body, usually in the femur, tibia, or fibula in the legs. 3. Greenstick fracture. This is a partial fracture that occurs mostly in children. The bone bends and breaks, but does not separate into 2 separate pieces. 4. Stress fracture. Stress fractures are also called hairline fractures. This type of fracture looks like a crack and can be difficult to diagnose with irregular X-rays. 5. Compression fracture. When bones are crushed, it is called a compression fracture. The broken bone will be wider and flatter in appearance than it was before the injury. 6. Oblique fracture. An oblique fracture is when the break is diagonal across the bone. This kind of fracture occurs most often in long bones. 7. Impacted fracture. An impacted fracture occurs when the broken ends of the bone are driven together. 8. Segmental fracture. The same bone is fractured into places, leaving a floating segment of bone between the 2 breaks. 9. Comminuted fracture. A comminuted fracture is one in which the bone is broken into 3 or more pieces. There are also bone fragments present at the fracture site. 10. Avulsion fracture. An avulsion fracture occurs when a fragment is pulled off the bone by a tendon or ligament.